Guys, we are just done with the Revolutionary War, and one of the first issues that comes up right away, immediately after the Revolutionary War, was the sort of tension, and that's why I call it the sort of mixed messages of freedom. Because on one hand, as you obviously know, the American Revolution claimed that on one hand you're fighting for freedom, but on the other hand, you practice slavery. Now, how exactly does that, how does that work out? You can't say that your belief in freedom for everyone and self-determination, and it's so great that you get to decide how your life, turns out. You don't have to listen to the king telling you what to do all the time. But then you turn around and practice slavery. It seems incredibly, incredibly hypocritical. But that was why some people were bringing up the issue. Hey, you're sending sort of mixed signals on slavery. However, as time went on, as we can see, slavery gradually disappeared. You see 1777 in Vermont, Pennsylvania shortly after, Massachusetts, New Jersey. And so those are only four, but obviously eventually slavery will be completely outlawed. Now, even though slavery was still legally outlawed, I should say, in the northern states for the most part. There were some exceptions. Some slaves still existed. So the point about that is just because you make something illegal doesn't mean that people stop doing it. But the other point is there was at least some progress made for slave rights and the abolishing slavery in the North. In contrast, in the South, slave rights made very little or no progress. And the main reason is because slaves were a key to the economy. Without slave labor, at least the argument goes, South would be in financial ruin. Now, whether or not that's true is another story. There's a lot of other arguments. Well, why can't you just pay them a little bit? You still make so much money. You're literally the equivalent of today's multi-billionaires. And to suggest that you couldn't afford a living wage is difficult to believe. Well, eventually, as you know, as slave rights and abolition takes over the country, emancipation, at least for the ones in the North and eventually in the South, does happen. However, emancipation did not bring equality. Slaves still faced discrimination all over the place, even if they were free. Even if you were not a slave, the freed slaves still faced discrimination. In many cases, denied the right to vote, denied the right to testify against a white man, which again is just, I don't really understand any sort of justification for that. Denied education in many cases, and denied the right to purchase land. And you remember our Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution. It's sort of in our idea of being American. Life, liberty, and pursuit of property was originally what it said, and of course they changed pursuit of property to pursuit of happiness. But it was pretty well understood that the American dream is land ownership. So, mixed messages of freedom, and as we know today, we still are dealing with race issues all across the United States. Is it getting better? I guess that's really in the eye of the beholder. Well, it's difficult for most people to understand how one justifies being racist or owning slaves, or really anything, because obviously it is morally repugnant, it's despicable, there is no justification for it. But the people who practiced slavery and believed in racist theories, they sort of had an idea of why it was okay. And slave owners argued that when they said that all men are created equal, which is one of the uh, foundations of the United States, it only applied to people of European descent. How they determined that is, but there's no basis for that. They just asserted it. Hey, it only applies to people of European descent. Oh, really? Where does it say that? Well, it doesn't say that anywhere. They believed that people of African descent were something less than fully human. There were occasionally these really bizarre scientific experiments that were, I shouldn't say scientific, they were under the guise of science that tried to show physiological differences in brain size and things like that. So um, they're all absolute nonsense, but there was at least an attempt to do that. Slavery existed in the Bible, so it must be okay. That was another argument that slave owners used. And even Thomas Jefferson, the person that we associate, with freedom and everything, he wrote the Declaration of Independence. Even he was negative toward African Americans. He believed that blacks were inferior to whites. Um, these very bizarre justifications for slavery and more mistreatment to many other groups, it's just bizarre, and it leads, to, hey, if it's okay to mistreat one group, then why isn't it okay to mistreat the other group? Um, there was other, when I say science, this guy Samuel George Morton later tried to use science. Let's put that in quotes there because it really wasn't science. Um, and it's just a very, very dark, dark chapter in American history. And just to be clear, there is no justification for racism or for slavery. So the other thing that needed to be done was after the revolution was, hey, we needed up some type of federal government. And so the Articles of Confederation really, the three main things from that were, at first it unified the federal government. So now you have a federal government. Now, we haven't talked much about this. We'll talk about this probably on Monday. But the idea of state versus federal government is a very, very important thing. And it comes under this thing we'll call jurisdiction. Federal government, as you know, is a government in Washington, D.C. And the first unified government that applies to all the states. It did work for a very short period of time. And soon inadequacies emerged. And this is not like, oh, you guys messed up. This is, hey, we're trying something brand new. Hopefully, we'll get it right. If not, we will certainly try to work on it. So they did have some powers, as you can see. The powers: foreign relations, settling disputes between states, handling Indian affairs, coining money, controlling maritime affairs. Those were all, very legitimate things. But the weaknesses are what the downfall of the Articles of Confederation. They could not raise revenue. So without money, you just have to ask, hey, can we please have some money? Could not raise an army. So I guess that means that you just have to ask really nicely. Because if you want something to happen and there's another state or someone else says no, and you don't have an army, there's really not a lot you can do about it. Required unanimous or all states to agree to any changes, no separation of powers, and no judicial branch. So they were significant weaknesses, but certainly over time, these are all addressed. And it's not something that, boy, you guys really messed up with this Articles of Confederation. It's, hey, we need to try something. This is new, and if it doesn't work, we will improve on it. All right, guys, that's it for today.